Seen the other videos, I was showing CasAuth v2 running localhost and debugging locally. And then also there's a video around deployment to Azure Kubernetes service. Today I'm going to show that same thing, but deploying to app service. So the first thing is, let's just look at the projects. If you've looked at the AKS video, this is the exact same files that I put together, but if you're coming off of the video for the local host, there's a couple of small changes. So for one, this is the authentication project. I added a health controller which just returns a 200 response, just so that we have an endpoint that we can actually test reliably to see if it's up. In the program section, I think in the first video I had added log level, but the logging didn't actually do anything. I've now added the logging directives, specified what we want to have for our host URL, and then .env to get the configuration settings locally. That won't actually matter when we deploy out to the server because we won't be using .env for that. And then in the startup file, same thing we saw before, add cas server auth, and then use routing, use cores, use cas server auth, and use endpoints. It's pretty straightforward. In the API project, same thing. We have a health controller. I left the weather forecast controller up just so we had something. And then in the program, exact same thing, log level, host URL, and the logging being turned on. And then startup, adding the CAS client auth, and then if we look at the configuration, it's use routing, use cores, use authentication, use authorization, use client CasAuth, and use endpoints. So pretty straightforward. And then the web project is literally just the exact same code from the sample that I have out on the CasAuth site. And these projects could work with those samples too. It's just I happen to build these new. Okay, so that's everything we've got there. So the first thing we need to do is go out into Azure and provision our app services. I've already done this. I provisioned an app service for plosne auth, for plosne web, and plosne API. I just mainly did that because it takes a while to provision and didn't want to wait for that on the video. If we go in and we look at, say, the authentication service, what I need to do now, actually before I even show that, here under custom domains, you can see that I actually added in my domain name here for my actual service, which is auth.plosne.com, and I registered my certificate, and for api.plosne.com for the API service, and web.plosne.com for the web service. You do need to register your own custom names for these. You won't be able to do cookies on a base domain that's the Azure by default base domain. So that's just a protection that your browser will enforce. So register your own names, put in your own certificates, all that's good. And then, okay, what else here? Then the next thing that we really want to do here is come under the Identity tab and enable a system identity. This is going to give us an identity for the authentication service that we can give access to our key vault and our configuration vault. Okay, so there we go. We've got our system identity. So now if I come out here and I go to my app config, which I have also provisioned. Okay, so I've got my app config instance. And then an app config, I haven't set up any of my settings or anything yet, so this should be clean here. Yep, nothing in there, perfect. But what I need to do now is to go ahead and put in my identity and access control role assignment for this particular ID. So I'll add the role assignment. We only need app config data reader, and then I can search for my authentication. Yep, there it is. Okay. plosne auth, we can add that. Okay, great. So that's all good. Now I need to do the same thing for our key vault as well. So if I come out here to my key vault, I can create a access policy on here and add the access policy for, select my principal. Principal in this case is going to be the PE Losney auth. Yep, there it is. Okay, and then this is going to need the ability to get secrets. It doesn't need anything else, so that's it. And we can save that, and that's all good. Now if we go to our API service, we can do basically the same thing. If I come in here to my API app service, all right, let's see, and I can just go ahead and show under custom domains we've got api.plosney.com. Come out here to the identity, we can turn on the identity for the API service. Okay, there we go, great. And then I can go and apply this identity to my config. So again, access control, we'll add a role assignment. There's a role for data reader, and this is PE Losney API. Okay, perfect. All right, great, and that's been added. We don't need to do the key vault for our API service. It's not going to have to get to any secrets. It'll just use the public cert, so we don't need to do anything there. And our web client doesn't need to have access to anything. It's not going to access the key vault, and it's not going to access our web client or anything else. So it's all good. We don't need to do anything. You can go ahead and put in all the configuration settings. So PE Losney auth, let's start there. And we go to configuration. A few settings we'll need to put in. App config, which is just simply the name of our app config instance, so that's a lot easier than the prior version. And then we can do config keys, and this can really be whatever you want, but the convention that I like to use is whatever I'm calling my project. We'll just call this sample, the service, the environment, and then the keys after that. So I'll do a star to grab all of them. And then I like to support the common set of parameters as well. And so this will go from left to right, but if the value is set by this, it won't be set by common. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn on my log level to debug just in case there's a problem with this. We will have some debug data. So that's all I need there. Okay. And then we'll go and we'll look at our API service. And it's going to be basically the same settings. App config is going to point to my app config, which is PE Losney config. And we're going to put in config keys. And it's going to basically be the same thing as what we had before, except this is going to be sample API dev, and again, sample common dev. Okay, it's good enough there. And then we will go ahead and add log level as well, just for consistency, and we'll do debug. Okay, so we got our 3 settings there, and we'll save this. Okay, and then we will go to our web. This one's not going to pull directly from the key vault, so all we're going to do here is we're going to provide a URL that it will get configuration settings from. And this is going to point to our API. Oops. And then /cas/config, and then whatever we're going to call the config, and we're going to call it web. And when we set up the configuration vault parameters for the API, we'll add a set of keys to present off of that URL. Okay, so that's it for that. Now we can go to our config. And we go to Configuration Explorer. And we can start adding some keys. So the first key we want to add, so sample, and this is going to be a common key for our dev environment, and it is server host URL. So server host URL is basically we can put in 3 URLs: server host URL, client host URL, and web host URL, and those servers, those URLs will allow it to provision all of the standard configuration options. So it just makes configuration a lot easier. So this is just going to point to the authentication service. So let me change that so you can see. So host URL auth.plosnay.com. We will add that same thing for client host URL, except the client host is of course api.plosnay.com. And we will add that same thing for web host URL, and that is going to be web.plosnay.com. Notice all of these have to be on some sort of same consistent base domain, but the system will automatically figure out what that base domain is. So in this case, plosnay.com, and we don't have to actually configure that. Now, there's 2 other settings we need for our actual authentication service, not for common and not for the API, and that is our tenant ID. And you'll remember this from where we set up the application in the first video. But we're going to add that in here. And then we're also going to add sample auth dev our client ID. Okay. So that's good. So we got our tenant ID and our client ID. Let's see what else I want to do here. So really the only other big, a couple other things. So I did mention we did want to present the config from our API, so we can go ahead and do that. So that's sample API dev, and then present config web, so that's what we decided to call it. And this will present a configuration items for whatever keys we set. So I'm going to do sample web dev asterisk. And that will cover some set of keys that we're going to present as the web configuration. And we can go ahead and put those in here. Sample web dev, there's a login URL, which is just the URL it uses when you hit the login button on the interface. And that is going to be our, that's going to be our auth service. So auth.plosnay.com cas authorize. And the next URL is going to be sample web dev, and it is called the me URL, and that's just the link that you go to when you hit me, and that's on our API service. So api.plosnay.com/cas_me. So cas_me just requires so the cas authorize is just a redirect endpoint that will redirect you through the Azure AD authentication loop. And the cas_me endpoint off of the API is just validates the authentication and authorization, and then returns to you a list of claims that it finds in the token that are non-standard claims. So a good way to identify yourself. So there are a couple of more settings that we're going to need in here, but these are going to be different. So these are going to be key vault references, and these are going to be the actual keys and stuff that we are going to store in Key Vault. But I don't actually, I haven't created those yet. So let's go ahead and go through the process of creating them and putting them in the Key Vault, and then we can just come back here and we can point this Key Vault reference and we can just pick them directly out of our Key Vault. So we're pretty much done here with the with the configuration settings until we do that. Create our keys. What we're going to do is follow what we have in the implementation page, which is right here. So to generate the keys for the key vault. So we're going to run this. Let me go ahead and make a directory. I'll just call it keys. All right, this is where I'm going to put my keys. So let's go ahead and generate a 365-day key. Let's do actually. Okay, so we've now got our certificate and our private key. We can convert this into a PFX. Okay. All right, so now we got our PFX created out of that. And now we can write out what our PFX looks like in base 64 encoding. So I'm going to grab this. Okay, and that is going to be what we put in our key vault as the private key. So if you come out here to the key vault, you go to secrets. And I can create a new secret. I'll call this sample private key. Oh, sorry, gonna have dashes. Okay. Simple private key, and then we can paste in the secret. Good there. Then we can create another one called sample, let's call it cert 0. And if we come out here, what we really want is the certificate PIM. Okay, so that's this here. That's already base 64 encoded, so we don't need to do anything, but we do want to grab the begin and end certificate. Okay. We do also need to create a password for, so sample private key, call it password. And this is just whatever you put in when we created the certificate, just there using up an SSL. I just used the word secret, so that's not very secret, but this is just a sample. Okay, so I got my private key password, my cert, and my private key, which is really all that I need in order to get this going. So now all those are in my key vault. That's all good. We know that the auth has access to the key vault, so I can come out here and go back to my config store and come down to the configuration explorer. Just change this so we can see all these values again. All right, so now I can add a key vault reference, and wait, this one will be sample auth dev private key. Okay, and let's look for my vault. And then in my vault, I can select, or in the resource group, I can select the vault. I can select the secret. This is my private key. Latest version is great. Okay, so there we have it. And then I can do the same thing here to do a sample auth dev. I need public cert 0. And again, I can pick my vault, pick my secret, sample cert 0. Okay, there we go. And finally, I will do the same thing. This is sample auth dev, and this is going to map to, let's see, private key password. If you're trying to figure out what any of these settings are, all these are here in the in this guide. So if we look up like private key. Yep, and then here we got our private key and our private key password. So easy enough. And private key password. Okay, so then again, I can pick this out of my vault. there's other ways we can do this, but this just provides a really simple, easy way to have all of our configuration still in the config vault and then be pointing back to something that's actually secure in our key vault. So that's pretty much it. We got a private key, private key, password, everything in there. And now we basically have all of our configuration done. So next we'll need to do the actual deployment of the solutions. Our authentication service first. So there's a bug right now, unfortunately, with make this a little bit bigger. There's a bug right now, unfortunately, with deployment using Git out to Azure for .NET 3.1 core. So that won't actually work for this project. So we're gonna have to do this through FTP, which is a little bit of a pain, but we can live with that. So let me just do a .NET. Well, let me do a .NET build just to make sure that this project builds. Okay, good. And then I will do a .NET publish to an out folder. Okay, so that will now have created all the files that I need actually to push my FTP. And then to go to the FTP and find out what my credentials and stuff are, if I go to plosnate auth, so notice that we're actually stopped. I purposefully stopped these instances because you can't really deploy via FTP while it's running if you might have blocked DLLs and stuff. So I stopped the service, and then under Deployment Center, you can come in here under FTP, and you can get the credentials, you can get the FTP endpoint and everything in there. I think I've already actually got these out here. Yeah, so here for my auth service, let me just reconnect and make sure I can actually get there. Okay, good. All right, so here's my www root folder. It's empty. I'm in my auth out folder that I just created. So that looks pretty good. And now I can copy up all of these files. The only thing we would not want to copy would be the .env file if we have one. But since it doesn't actually have a file name, it looks like that the just FileZilla, which I'm using, doesn't actually show those files anyway, so that works out great. So I can copy all the files over to here. Well, let me be clear, if you are using another FTP client or whatever, it does show the .env, don't copy the .env because we're doing all of our configuration through Azure, not through the local env file. Okay, so that's fully deployed over to this side. And then what I should be able to do now is come back over here and start this. And I can come down here to the log stream and hopefully see this start up. Okay, so I think we probably started. Let's do a curl to https auth.plosnate.com /cas. Let's just do authorize and see if we get back. Oops, let me do -i so we can see what the response is. Okay, perfect. So it gave us the redirection URL, which is all we needed anyway. So that's perfect. So we know the service is at least up and operational. So let's go ahead and put up our API service, and then our web service, and then we can just go ahead and test the full solution. I mean, we could do testing here under the auth endpoint, see if we get an actual response and everything back. But it's probably not worth doing that. If we get the authorized endpoint, we're probably pretty good. Okay, so let's go and look at the API. And again, let's make sure it's actually stopped. It is. And then we can go and get all of our information from the deployment center again. But I think I already have that. So let's just over here, let's step back out and let's go into our API folder. Let's do a .NET build. Okay, we're good there. I'm going to remove the out folder that I have, and then I'll do a .NET publish to that out folder. Okay, good. So now we've got, again, all the same files that we had there. We can step back over here and connect to our API instance. I'll just disconnect and reconnect. Okay, and we don't have anything in here, and then our API. Make sure we've got all of our files. Yep, we got some files from this morning, so that looks good. I can now grab the whole entire set of files again, and again, you would leave out the .env if it were here, and copy those over to the www root. Okay, everything finished copying, so that's all good. And so now I can come back over here and we can start this and get into our log stream. And hopefully see that this starts up okay. Yep, looks like we've got some data coming through. So now we can do a curl https.api.plosday.com / let's say cas. Let's look at me, and that should give us a 401 because we're not authenticated. Okay, we did get a 401. So that's good. Actually, the other thing we could check is we can do the config web to make sure that we actually get configuration settings for our website. And we do. We got the login URL and the me URL, so that's good. Okay, so we pretty much know that the API is working the way we would expect it to. So now we can go ahead and put up our website. Now, the web endpoint that we have out here is actually deployed using Node. And that's not broken, so we can just use a git deploy. So let me just remove, I think I already have a git associated with this, but let me just go ahead and remove that so that I can show this from the start. Okay. All right, so we removed the git folder, and let's go ahead and remove our git ignore file, and I'll create a new one just to show you that one. Okay, so now if we run git, yep, we're not associated with anything. So if I come over here and I go to the deployment center, I can turn on git, local git. Now, I actually already did this. Let me just show from the beginning. I'll just disconnect it. Okay, so I have all my options here. I can choose local git and continue, and this will create a git endpoint that we can talk to. Okay, so there's our git endpoint. And now over here, I can do a git init. I can do a git remote add, we'll call this Azure, and add the git endpoint. Then I should go ahead and create a git ignore file. And the only stuff that I really want to ignore, I want to ignore node modules, anything under node modules. And that, actually, see, I want to ignore my .env file as well. I don't actually know if I have a .env for this one, but just in case I do. Okay, so great. So that will deploy everything. Some of these files we don't actually need, so I guess we could add those to our thing as well, but it's fine. As long as we get the process JSON, the package JSON, the package lock file, then the Azure deployment instance will take care of doing all the rest for us. So I can add everything. I can get, let's do git status to make sure these are the files that I wanted to get. Yep, looks fine. So I can git commit this, let's say, is first. And I can git push this, and we'll get the full URL here. Okay. Oh, yeah. Let me do a force. So it looks like I've already deployed to this site in some of my prior testing. So we'll do a force, and then it'll override everything on the server side. Okay, so this looks pretty good. And notice it's running the npm install and everything, so that's all good. Okay, so that looks like it deployed everything. I had turned this one off just because I was keeping it consistent with the other ones. It doesn't actually need to be off in order to do the git deploy, but we will go ahead and turn it on now. And hopefully what we should see pretty quickly says initialized and ready to serve requests. Downloading some certificates. We can go ahead and check and see if this is up. This might take a minute. Oh, it is up. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our developer tools. Okay, so when I came out here to this site, okay, web plasna default, you'll notice if we look at our network here, we pulled the config by hitting the local config instance, and that's great. What it does is it then hits the URL that we have configured for config URL. And we did get a 200 response. So actually, if we take a look at the response, then we can see we got the login URL and the me URL, which are these URLs they're going to show on here. So that's great. So now I can go through the login process. And this, this will redirect me through Azure AD and everything. Now, I'm already logged in on this window, so I didn't have to go through the full authentication prompts. But the important part, if we look down in here, so you see we hit the authorized endpoint redirects us to the Microsoft endpoint, and then back here to our token endpoint. And the important thing we'll see off our token endpoint is we got 2 cookies set. So we got the XSRF token cookie set, and we got the cookie set for our actual session. And if we take a look at this in JWT.io, then we can see the actual cookie that we got generated. So it's got our XSRF token, it's got my email address, my name, everything in the token. So that's all good. And in fact, the other way we're going to see it now is we're going to actually do an authentication request and test it by hitting get user info. And you'll see that it did an options request to me, and then it hit the me endpoint, and of course we can see the response up here as well, is it got the claims, the non-standard claims, so the OID, the email, and the name out of that ticket, and everything works perfectly fine. So our web service is up, our API service is up, which is what just did this authentication, and our authentication service is up, which is what did our full endpoint. So that's basically it. Everything's working as it should.